Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to the Catholic Mama, where you'll learn how to deepen and defend your faith, find comfort as we share the vocation of parenthood, and learn how to raise your children confidently Catholic. I'm your host, Christine Mooney-Flynn. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome to the Catholic Mama. I'm your host, Christine Mooney-Flynn, and thanks for joining me today on this podcast, along with, as he's taking a little sip of something, husband Pat. He's back, everybody.
Hello again.
Yep,
Good to be here.
Pat Flynn
Should probably
is his
turn
name.
and face you. We're both kind of...
I know, we're actually... We're probably as lazy as we possibly could get with our seating arrangement right now. That's all right. It's a Saturday afternoon. It's a bit snowy outside, and we're just cozying up for podcast.
Yeah, what a perfect
What fun.
activity. Very nice. Good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Can't get rid of you. If anybody hears any weird noises in the background, we have a small baby who is plumping up nicely at almost 3 months old. So if you hear anything like that, well, that's the reason. Don't leave a bad review because of it. There's too much background noise. No, anyway, so you have a special project.
Yes.
And we are going to kind of play it out here on this podcast, but I think it would be better if you explain it. So go ahead.
Yeah. This was your idea, first off. So I didn't totally voice this on you, but
it was. I didn't mean. Yeah, that's right. I did say record it. You're right.
Here is the background. I was recently brought on to be the writer and content producer for the apologetic material for St. Paul Street Evangelization. Very cool organization that really just focuses on spreading the good news, preaching the gospel. And they have online courses of resources that help to equip people to engage in productive live conversations, like literally out on the streets, out and about with people. So through various connections, they got in contact with me, and they wanted somebody to help them to develop their apologetic content for engaging with people who are religious skeptics, for atheists, since they knew that my background in that, as both being a skeptic myself and philosophy, seemed to be relevant. And I was happy to do this, and I should say I'm happy to do this because we're in the middle of producing the content right now. And part of what's interesting about this is it's not just explaining, say, arguments for God's existence. That is part of the curriculum, but they also really want, and I think this is cool, ideas for how to present these arguments in dialogue, how to foster charitable conversation, and really how to hopefully eventually invite people to consider becoming Catholic. That's the goal, right? The goal isn't to just win arguments. The goal is to save souls, and they have great emphasis on this, and this is something that I've always tried to focus on in my own apologetic efforts, is finding that common ground first, establishing a conversation, and then when somebody is open to it, making sure you do have good reasons and evidence and arguments. But you have to be very careful in your procedure. You can't just, launch into like a shotgun style argument, start just blasting away. People tend to get very defensive. It's generally annoying. So approach means a lot. So I was talking with you and saying, kind of explaining all this, because I had most of the arguments written out in more of a technical format, as they would be presented, I think, in a book. And I was like, well, now I got to do the dialogue format. And that's when you said, well, why don't we just chat about these on the podcast and give people sort of a real live sample. Of course, it's not like totally authentic because you're my wife, but...
Well, it's something, and I don't know... From a philosophical standpoint, you are definitely the more educated of the two of us. So I do, even though I'm familiar with a lot of these arguments, and I'm already a Catholic, I am still a novice when it comes to this sort of thing.
Well, this is something that's been challenging for me as well, is because I spend a lot of time. My specialty has been natural theology, metaphysics, traditional natural law. So I spend a lot of time on the sort of more technical forms of argumentation. But when you hit the streets, let's be frank, the vast majority of people don't care about it. For the vast majority of people, most of it will go over their heads. So I think that's something that has to be appreciated, is that, okay, you might have really good, airtight, deductive arguments for the existence of God, but if people can't understand what you're saying and they can't recognize that it's a good argument, and you can't find common ground or find a point of connection, then what's the point, right? So,
yeah. Well, real quick before we get started on this, you mentioned your past or your experience as being an atheist. And you got to share some of that experience in real great hour-long detail on EWTN. Mm-hmm. And the episode just aired this week, so tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, very exciting. I was expecting it to air a little bit later this month, and then the producer emailed me and said, hey, it's going up today. I'm like, what? Sweet. Let me know how it is, because I don't have cable. And then somebody on my Facebook, when I posted it, said you could stream it live. So we watched it on the old iPad. Yeah,
and it was the Journey Home program on EWTN, which the Journey Home chronicles converts or reverts for the first time, or there's the train.
The train that lives behind our house.
Whether they are first time coming to the faith or were baptized Catholic, left, and are coming back.
Yeah, and what's so cool about the Journey Home is you get so many different backgrounds. You have obviously Protestants who come into the Catholic faith. You have people who are agnostic, who were atheists. I just watched a really interesting episode of somebody who was raised Hindu and then became a Catholic priest. So that was really cool. So just it's just a nice show. It's just nice, and it was a joy to be on. Marcus Grodi, the host, is just an exceptional conversationalist. He just makes it so easy, and I've gotten really great feedback so far. And the show must reach a lot of people. I know they say that EWTN is in millions of homes, but I've gotten a lot of just emails of people which I get a ton of emails already just from my online stuff that I just watched your episode, and I really enjoyed it, and blah blah blah, and so that's been really cool. It's been really rewarding, because the whole point of doing something like that is to hope that it makes some impact in somebody's life in some positive way.
Yeah, because of our business, the family business, over the years, I've seen you speak at conferences and run big weekend-long events, but you've never been on TV, so that was a lot of fun.
Well, isn't that funny, right? Because I've had published books. I've been doing my online thing for a while, and I've had publishers pitch TV, and I never got on TV. It was just one of no, I never pressed it that hard, because
weren't you a passing guest on a Food Network show once with Mark Summers?
Yes, technically that is true. So I have been on TV. I've been on the Food Network, but so it's just kind of ironic that the first time I go on TV is just completely unrelated to all of the kind of formal publishing stuff I've done in the past.
The Holy Spirit.
But yeah, honestly, by God's grace. I mean, but what a wonderful thing. The one thing I would love to be on TV for more than anything else is to just share what God has done for me in my life. So
yeah, I will put a link in the show notes if anybody would like to watch that interview on the Journey Home Network or program that Pat did for EWTN. I'll put that in the show notes. It was and I've gotten some nice feedback because I've shared it on my Instagram. People have said it's articulate and intelligent and a real joy to watch.
That's
so
right.
It was fun. And that is actually the reason that we took a 1,300-mile road trip in 4 days last month, which I think I'm still tired
Still recovering from, yes. Those children. God bless them. Yeah, it was great.
Okay. So how do you want to start this?
So a little more background. I guess sort of the content I've been working on is this idea of the series they called is One Good Reason. So the idea is you start fostering a conversation with somebody, you're literally out on the street. So you have these conversation starters, and people may have seen, if not people specifically from St. Paul Street evangelization, but they may have seen people who've gone out in public and hand out rosaries or miraculous medals or things like that. So that's kind of what's the sort of content I'm preparing would be for people like that who really just want to go out into the public square, get conversation started however they can, usually with acts of charity, giving away some gift or something like that, and by just asking questions and seeing where people are at. And then sort of my role is to provide content where if somebody asks where somebody is at, with their religious faith, or if they believe in God, if somebody says no and they're an atheist, then hopefully I'll have given them the equipment to be able to stage a productive conversation with something. For example, why you should believe in God.
Okay. Is that the topic we're covering today?
We could, yeah.
Well,
or just like the nature of, how to stage an effective apologetic conversation, something like that, I think might be helpful.
Okay.
So, yeah, you want to role play? And it's kind of cheesy, but I'm somebody who actually has had a ton of these conversations. I mean, even among my circle of closest friends, I have one who's Jewish, one who's Hindu, one who's atheist. So, I'm frequently engaging with people who are not on the same page with me. I think they're all wrong, of course. They know I think they're wrong. That's no surprise to that, right? And also, people online all the time, and in person. So, I think the biggest thing is, if you want to get better at having these conversations, the first thing I would say is you just need to have them, right? You want to get better at improvising and playing a musical instrument, you got to practice it. So you can sit down and read all the books and study all the arguments you want, but once you're kind of know where a conversation is going to go, so you really need to develop that skill specifically, conversational skills. So, why don't we just talk about that and maybe just kind of play along? So, okay, hi.
Hello.
Go ahead.
I have not accepted Jesus as my personal Lord and Savior. Is that the kind of thing we're doing here?
Sure. Well, I would say something. Well, do you mind sharing a little bit of your religious background? Has there ever been a time when you were religious? Was there ever a time that you believed in God? Did you grow up in a religious family? Just tell me a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My dad always said that religion, especially Christianity, was kind of bogus. And I grew up with a former Catholic family, so I think I have a pretty good idea of what Catholicism is all about, and I think it's all a lot of pomp and circumstance, and I don't know. I think it's trying to create too much of a middleman. I think it's trying to create too much of a middleman between myself and God. Sure.
So you would say you believe in God?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's something out there.
Okay. And as for your father, do you guys have a strong relationship? Was he a good dad?
Yeah, great dad. Very strong relationship.
Oh,
absolutely.
So that makes me happy. So obviously Catholicism couldn't have done him completely wrong then.
I'm not sure if he would agree with that, but yeah, maybe. I mean, he was a good dad, and he provided for the family, so maybe he did learn something.
So I'd be curious, if you asked your dad, why he stepped away from the church, why he rejected Catholicism, what would be his main reasons for that?
That's a really good question. I should actually do that. I have no.
But this is the real nature of these types of conversations.
Yeah.
We've never actually had this conversation before.
No, we haven't. No,
And the point I want to make is, don't be so quick to start giving arguments. So, as soon as you said that the middleman between you and God, the natural impulse there is to want to step in and be like, no, that's not true. That's not Catholicism at all. But what I would encourage people to is ask questions and continue to build that type of relationship, because really what we're challenging is hopefully challenging somebody's presuppositions. Okay, my dad said Catholicism was bunk, but wait, he never gave me any reasons for thinking that.
Yeah.
So why did he reject that? And sometimes that's really productive. Sometimes that's if somebody can. Here's what I would want to emphasize. And sorry to interrupt the role play here, but hopefully this is helpful. Is people may or may not, leave with being impressed by your specific arguments, but they will certainly leave with some impression of how you treated them.
Right.
That's really important.
Oh, Catholics aren't mean. They're not jerks or whatever.
Yeah, this person seemed genuinely interested in hearing about me. I spoke about 4 times as much as they did. They were listening. And people on this podcast know that I almost never shut up. But when it's happening, asking questions is really one of the best apologetic tactics that you can take. Because people tend to like to be listened to. It makes them feel important. It makes them feel special. It makes them feel heard. So just by asking questions and really giving space to hear somebody's background, hear their perspective, where they're coming from, even if they're saying a million things you disagree with and want to hop in right away and start trying to argue with them, maybe don't at first. Just keep going until you got to the point, which was pretty quickly that we did, where they kind of laugh and realize, oh, maybe I don't know. Maybe I don't have a good reason for that. because it's almost always the reverse, right? It's almost always somebody pressuring the religious person of why they believe things, and they get to a point where they laugh and they don't know why they believe it, and then they start questioning their faith, which obviously isn't great. Like you should resolve that. You should seek those answers. But it works in every direction. Like the person who isn't religious, they still have a worldview of some kind. They have positions that they've accepted that they probably haven't questioned. They still have a worldview of some kind. They have positions that they've accepted that they probably haven't questioned, that are just built on certain presuppositions that have not been examined. And trying to get at that, I think, can be really helpful. And you can see how quickly you can get there if you're just willing to ask questions and not hop directly into the arguments.
Right.
So, anyway, we totally ruined that conversation.
Way to go, Pat. So I think you were asking, what are the reasons that my dad stepped away from Catholicism?
Yeah.
I have no idea. That's a really good question. I have heard glimpses of it. I mean, his main complaints have typically been that I know the nuns beat him up a lot. But this is what,
somebody
50s,
was mean to him.
Somebody was mean to him. But I think you said that, like, even if somebody beats you up over a math or teaching you math.
Yeah, if somebody whooped the crap out of me trying to convince me that I just wouldn't have appreciated the method they used to instill that. and so, but those are points you can bring up. Like you say, oh, that's unfortunate. Like we want to affirm, like I'm really sorry that your father had such a bad experience. People have often bad experiences with people in authority all the time. But do you think that just because somebody has, a somewhat cruel method of teaching something, that what they're teaching is wrong?
No, it's just unfortunate, right? That would have driven him away from Catholicism.
And on things like that, I think we want to cede as much ground as reasonable and is as possibly is necessary. Like, if somebody was mean to somebody, like, acknowledge that. Be like, that is unfortunate. Like that definitely sucks. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Catholicism isn't true. And just, kind of like giving those that Catholicism isn't true. And just, kind of like giving those gentle nudges can be really helpful. Now, this is interesting because you're actually telling your actual story.
Yeah.
So you're not coming from the atheistic perspective, but this is still good because, when you're out there having these conversations, you never know what people are going to say. And in fact, your position is far more common. Atheism is still statistically like a very, very small minority. Most people, especially people of younger generations, they still believe in God, or at least some like very general
universal
sense of
life
God,
force,
right? They just don't, belong to any particular organized religion. So I don't know if I'll be writing content specifically for that. But what I'm doing is addressing atheists, like somebody who would say, I really don't believe in God.
It's hard. It's hard for me to actually role play that. I mean, that's where I was at shortly before converting, but I don't even want to pretend.
Back and forth of what some of those conversations have looked like in my experience.
Yeah, I mean, as far as when I remember it was something I think you had said about research has shown that the brain is not really elastic, or it was something similar, like what. If you haven't learned something yet, the chances of your brain growing and developing and learning something as an adult is slim. And for whatever reason, at that point in time, I think I was struggling with other things anyway. I was working in an office at a full-time job that I didn't want to be at anymore. I wanted to be home with our firstborn. And I was just really struggling, like, well, nothing seems like I can't grow. My brain isn't going to even develop. And I love to learn, but I'm not even going to get any smarter. I'm not going to learn anything.
I'm permanently stupid.
Yeah, I'm permanently stuck like this.
I don't believe
that,
by the way, folks.
I know, yeah.
It's like a very fleeting, and I think you totally took it wrong, what I was saying.
I don't even know if you remember the...
I don't even remember this conversation.
It's amazing. I don't even know if you remember the...
I don't even remember this conversation.
It's amazing what things... That's something. The kids, when I was picking them up from Taekwondo earlier today, they have this new thing. They're making them say at the end of class, and it's like, just one mean word can ruin somebody's day. Just one blah, blah, blah can do this to somebody. And then they do the reverse and say, just one kind word can...
How true that is.
And it's funny, because you don't even remember this thing. But it's amazing how, in passing, this remark left such a deep put me in such a different mindset than I had been previously because I was already struggling. Mm-hmm. And it was like, well, this is it? I'm stuck like this? What's the point of living? Maybe, and then I started like, maybe we are just what do you like to call them? Bosions and fermions and bosons?
Fermions and bosons. They're fundamental particles, yeah.
Maybe this is
a haphazard cloud of particles.
Yeah, maybe there's no point to any of this, and at the end I'm just going to decay in the earth and blah blah blah, maybe a couple years like that. But you're right, most of my life and most of anybody else who doesn't subscribe to an organized religion these days would be more like I was back then. But yes, I do have some experience in being in utter despair.
Yeah, hold on, we'll pause for 1 second. We have a child in need.
Can you go check?
And we are back. Sorry for the slight interruption.
Our 2-year-old needed a Paw Patrol episode change.
They're so specific with what it's amazing how early those preferences are.
Oh yeah,
demonstrated.
Yeah, demonstrated. It's a nice way of putting it.
Yeah, not commanded, not shouted. Demonstrated. So anyways, I don't want to draw this out too much. Maybe. So let's say that you're having a conversation with somebody, and they do say, hey, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God. I don't belong to any religion. Now, it's very believe in God. I don't belong to any religion. Now, it's very important that you kind of have to get a pulse on what kind of atheist this person is, and I mean that in a couple different ways. One is that they might, the term atheism has become so slippery, and I pointed this out in EWTM. It can be anything from a very strong form of atheism of somebody who really just affirms a very strict physicalist worldview. There's no such being as God or anything like God. Or it can become sort of weak and agnostic-y, where people will say, I just don't, I don't feel convinced, right? I just don't know either way. So the only way to determine where somebody is of course to ask them. But then, so that's sort of the intellectual scale. There's also the emotional scale, and the emotional scale is what's their temperament about this? And some people are going to be totally cool. Some people are going to be very open, charitable, and you're just going to have to be able to use prudence to decide, what is the best way to handle this situation? And I found with somebody who's really hostile, just launching into arguments is probably generally a waste of time. You really need to spend more time trying to build a relationship with that person if anything productive is going to happen. And we've all had experiences with of people like this, right, where for whatever reason they are so emotionally set against a position. It doesn't matter what you say. They're just going to dig their heels in no matter what. So
they might wind up coming up with some very obscure, ridiculous arguments just to maintain their position that they might not even actually believe, but they refuse. They're just so stubborn.
And oftentimes, the best thing to do is sometimes people might be like this because they did have a really bad experience, maybe even a traumatic experience with growing up or religion in general. So the best thing you can do is really kind of listen to these people. And growing up or religion in general. So the best thing you can do is really kind of listen to these people and just, subtly but gently try to interject, but really make sure they feel like they're being heard, which is difficult to do, especially if they're very aggressive. Fortunately, I've found is aside from YouTube trolls, these people are the minority when it comes to actually being out and about among people. Most people are quite receptive. For example, we had dinner recently with 2 wonderful friends of ours, and one of them is Catholic or kind of thinking of returning to the Catholic faith, and the other one's atheist/agnostic. Has never really considered Lindsay and Jeff.
Oh,
Lindsay and Jeff. Yeah, you're looking around who we talking about. Right?
Okay.
So if they're listening,
that was my guess.
And and we had a great conversation. This would be a great one kind of to model where Jeff said, and sorry, if you're listening, hi guys, love you both. But I want to compliment him here is that he had kind of experience with religion growing up, Bible school, he was picked on, right? And that's really a shame. And as somebody who's been picked on myself in other circumstances, I get that. It just leaves a really foul taste in your mouth, and that's the last thing you want. But to Jeff's credit, he has always kept a really open mind. But nobody up to that point had ever given him a religious argument before. So I asked him, we had 2 conversations, and I said, what's, where are you at? Where are you coming from? What have you heard for it? What have you heard against it? And, he kind of like threw some stuff out, and I addressed it. It wasn't, like anything uncommon. It was kind of like pretty, and he wasn't doing it like in a combative sense. He was just saying, here's kind of where I'm at. And then I said, can I tell you what convinced me? And I think that's really helpful. Like if you have a conversion story, if you can say, well, here's where I was coming from. I was a skeptic for a long time, and here's what convinced me. Somebody's going to relate to that. If you don't have that, then you can, most anybody can say, oh yeah, I was challenged at least once or twice in my faith.
That's what I was going to say. Everybody, even a cradle Catholic, if you were going to continue strongly in your faith, there is a moment of reconversion, a rediscernment that you are still Catholic.
Yeah,
tap into that.
Yeah, when I first encountered the problem of evil, that was a really difficult thing for me. But here's how I overcame it. Or when I was in the 7th grade, somebody asked what evidence is there for God's existence, and I was totally embarrassed because I didn't have any arguments. And admit that, be honest. But then I looked into it, and I read this book, and here's what really helped me. And so just that little positioning really helps, because rather than saying, here's why you should believe in God right now, you're being more gentle and sincere and saying, here's what really helped me. And I think that's how I presented it. I said, I came to realize that instead of giving one argument, I kind of gave, but why anything exists instead of nothing, why the universe began to exist, the fine-tuning of physics for intelligent life, our perception of objective moral values and duties, religious experience, mystical experience, near-death experience, the uncanny applicability of mathematics to the universe. How cool is that? If that doesn't smack of some transcendent intelligence, and just a general order, stability, and intelligibility of the universe. The fact that the universe is intelligible is a freaky fact. Why isn't everything just winking chaos all the time? Just take a huge step back and think about that. And what I found is, from an apologetic tactic, actually just listing a lot of reasons like that people have never heard is sometimes a lot more effective than trying to go really deep in any one subject. Just laying out the broad outline. Yeah. Because that really makes people take a step back, because they realize, okay, maybe any one of those might not have convinced me, but when you put them all together, because they realize, okay, maybe any one of those might not have convinced me, but when you put them all together, the cumulative case now seems really interesting and really strong. Yeah,
and that's definitely what got me, at least, because I had always thought that Christ had just been some nice, either a myth, or he was just a spiritual teacher like Buddha. So, and then most of everything about his life had probably become legend by the time it was actually written into the Bible. So, in the case for Christ, I don't know how many times I'm going to mention this book on this podcast.
That is a really well done book. It's one of those books that, it's popular level, but it is really well done. So and
it shows from a psychological standpoint, from a historical standpoint, a religious standpoint.
Philosophical.
Yeah, there was just arguments in each one of these realms, and I was like, oh, okay. So you put them all together.
It's a cumulative case.
Yes.
And I've really found, honest to goodness, that in apologetic context, don't just try and go deep into any one argument first. Lay out the hostile from the start. It really makes them take a sort of a synoptic vision and go, oh yeah, that actually, that all that sounds good. And maybe I want to dig deeper into any one, and that's where you say, okay, pick one. You want to talk about contingency, or the beginning of the universe, or teleology, or fine-tuning, or the moral argument, or the case for the resurrection, or I didn't even mention consciousness, but that's certainly one I would throw in there. The fact that consciousness cannot be reduced in principle to just physical processes alone, that there's something more than just the sort of the fermions and bosons, right, to reality. That's a really, I think, powerful one to throw into the cumulative case there. And then, you want to have at least, I would say, and that's beyond the scope of this episode, but a general understanding of how to make a case for any one of those. But I have honestly felt, I've actually been disappointed a number of times, because I'll lay out that case. But I have honestly felt, I've actually been disappointed a number of times, because I'll lay out that case, and then somebody will be oh, that's really interesting. I'm like, okay.
You got any other questions?
Any questions? You want to go deeper into anyone? They're like that. That gets them, and it's really fun. And I'm ready to go deeper. I want to go deeper, but I realize that
people are good with that.
But people understand, and John Henry Newman pointed this out. It's when people come to assent, it's not usually because of like one single like clinching argument. It's usually through a series of like converging and convincing, but often various lines of evidence. It usually is like a cumulative case, like one piece of evidence here, one argument there, one experience here, and they all kind of point or converge in the same general direction. And at some point, it hits a tipping point where somebody finally goes, oh, yeah, like the scales tip. And sometimes when I talk with skeptics, I say, okay, just imagine two scales, right? And that any one of these arguments or piece of evidence is like a rock on either side. And imagine for theism. Beginning of the universe, rock for theism. Like everything I did were just a bunch of rocks for theism. Okay, now let's put the rocks for atheism, whatever you think they are, and I'll let them put them out. And then maybe they'll realize from there, oh wow, there's just a lot more rocks for theism. I should go for that. Or maybe they think it's kind of even, and then we can dive a little bit deeper. Or see, maybe some of the rocks you put in atheism, like the problem of evil, actually you can't even make sense of evil without objective moral values and duties. And you can't even make sense of objective moral values and duties without God. So when you really think about that, that actually turns out being a rock for theism, not atheism. And so we can just start to switch some of those rocks around. And I think that's like a helpful way to approach it too once you get to a certain point in the conversation is, hey, let's be completely even-handed. Whatever you think, in your experience, don't let me do this. I'll just list things out and you tell me, should this go over here or over there? Or you list things out and you can put them wherever you want. I think those are just good ways to kind of have these types of conversations.
Yeah. And to get back to your point about the humility and making sure that you are asking questions of the person and listening more and not immediately jumping in or judging them for where they're at currently. So when I grew up in the Bible Belt, I encountered a whole lot of rapture believers. Yeah. And the first question, I joke about it. Have you accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior? Mm-hmm. And then saying, no, what are you talking about? I don't even know what that means. The next thing, inevitably, we're like, well, you're going to hell. You're like, excuse me?
Hey, thanks, dude.
Yeah, so it's just, and I think, man, if you, I'm sure many marginal, nominal believers or non-believers have more than one instance where they felt judged by someone of a religion. Mm-hmm. And so if you can come at any of your apologetics conversations from deep humility and really trying to help somebody and really try to understand them mm-hmm. and really make it the conversation is for them, not for your own ego, that would probably challenge what most, again, marginal believers or non-believers believe about Christians. Which is, and I always did it too, I thought they were hypocrites. Whoa. Because they talked to humility, they talked like, what would Jesus do? And then turned around and judged.
And I have to say, this is something where like it's absolutely convinced me of God's grace. Because I think I've been able to do a pretty good job of this in spite of who I am. And you know me. I literally, every personality type, like I'm the debater. I'm somebody who likes to get into that intellectual arms race. Yep. I'm somebody who, for the whole time I've ever been, for as long as I remember, I'm the person who just loves to go right to the arguments and let's duke it out. But since becoming Catholic and realizing it isn't about winning arguments, and look, I still mess. I'm far from perfect, believe me. But I think I'm getting better. I really do. I've been able to just take a step back and realize it's about this person. It's not about me being right. And it's about person. It's not about me being right. And it's about doing what I can to will the good of them because that's what God wants for me. And that's what is good for me. Like, it's not good for me just to be egotistical and want to win arguments. That is not how I flourish. How I flourish is by loving others. And sometimes that means exactly what you've just said. I can't just get into this intellectual arms race, even if that makes me feel good in the moment, because it might actually do some damage. Yeah. It might turn somebody off. So that's probably a good note to... So hopefully there's some decent general tips in here for people. I know the role play didn't work out exactly, but we had fun, right?
Yeah, it was great. What a conversation. So anybody who's listening, Pat and I are going to come back around to part 2 of our marriage discussion next time, where if you listen to the episode, How to Argue with...
air before this, possibly. We're going to record the episode after this.
Oh, are we?
I don't know.
Okay.
It's your show.
I'm probably going to put this up right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Okay.
All right, bye.
So, with your spouse like a Catholic, that was a fun one to do. We're going to, and we touched on a lot of difficult teachings in our modern world about the roles of men and women in marriage. We're going to come back because there's so much richness in the Sacrament of Matrimony section of the Catholic Catechism, and we're going to come back to that next time. So if you have any questions that you would like myself or Pat and myself to answer, I'll put a link in the show notes. You can just click on that, jot your question in, and we will get to it in an upcoming episode. But for now, hit subscribe, leave a nice review, and have a wonderful day.
Don't forget to head over to thecatholicmama.com to get your free copy of How to Talk to Your Kids About God. This handy little ebook will teach you how to broach the topic of God with your children, or how to respond to your kids when they want to talk about God, as well as give you answers to 7 of the trickiest questions about the faith that Christian parents face. You'll love the easy-to-understand grown-up answers, the pared-down but not talked-down answers you can share with your kids, plus recommended resources if you'd like to deepen your understanding of the topic. Get yours free at thecatholicmama.com.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.